The Second Amendment of the United States Constitution states, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." The interpretation of this amendment is constantly debated, and the issues of gun ownership and gun control continue to be an emotional divider in this country. In the aftermath of the Virginia Tech shootings, a movement has begun to look at the potential benefits and consequences of allowing concealed weapons on college campuses. According to the National Conference on State Legislatures, since December 2007, at least 14 state legislatures have put forth some type of legislation to support carrying concealed weapons on campus. Although many of the bills died in committee this year, proponents of this issue are determined to see this legislation brought back to life in the 2008-2009 session.
Our campuses should be safe places for education and learning, and I don't think anybody should need a gun on campus.
I believe, there are instances where concealed weapons should be permitted to be carried.
Concealed weapons, I think they're okay if they're maybe for protection in your home, but not on school.
Personally, I'm not for it just because we've had, the Virginia Tech shooting.
I personally don't like it because, people react in situations out of anger or, in some type of way.
It falls under the same category as airports. You know what I'm saying? You can't allow people in airports to carry guns. That's what TSA does to prevent weapons and bombs and stuff like that from going through airports. There are certain facilities such as colleges and government agencies that were protected by law enforcement.
You can use so many things to stop the person that is shooting. You can overpower him.
I would just, try to use blunt force.
I know at our school they have the Bees emergency technology thing where you can alert the students if something goes on. And we do have a periodical check around our campus where a security guard walks through the classrooms and he comes and he talks.
I think it's a complicated issue because on the one hand, it seems there is an argument where a society that's sort of perpetually petrified that someone that you may encounter is armed and could wield this ungodly retribution on you. I think it probably does I can see how it might make a society less pleasant but more safe.
Honestly, with this day and age, you can't really trust anybody that carries a weapon anymore.
But on the other hand, human beings have hot tempers, and I think carrying weapons, especially I think for men, not to make sexist remarks, but I think there's a fair amount of bravado that can go on, and if buttons are pushed and it's the wrong circumstances, and I think as a society encouraging people to carry weapons or making it easy isn't the way we should go either. So I'm a bit conflicted on what the correct answer is.
Concealed weapons on campus. You decide.
Hello and welcome to this episode of VoiceBox. Today we're going to talk about the issue of carrying concealed weapons on college campuses. As you know, you are more than welcome to be a part of this conversation. You can call into the studio and ask your questions at 703-524-2348. Now I'm going to introduce you to our guest and we'll move forward with this conversation. To my left, the first person that we have here is Mr. John Lott. He is a senior research scientist at the University of Maryland. We have Andrew Briza, who is a member of Students for Concealed Carry on campus. We have Mike Lynch, who is the chief of police for the George Mason University. And we have Brian Siebel, who's a senior attorney at the Brady Center. So if we could start with Andrew. I would like for you to tell us a little bit about your organization, why it exists, and what your stance is on this issue.
Well, Students for Concealed Carry on campus was founded about 1 year ago after the Virginia Tech massacre. And it's centered around the belief that the rights that a state grants to people, to responsible, law-abiding citizens, should not expire simply because they're on a college campus. It's a grassroots national network that's composed mostly of volunteers. We have 30,000 members across the United States. 90% of us are students. Like I'm a volunteer student representative myself. So our name says our single issue, or students for concealed carry on campus.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch,
Yes, ma'am.
could you tell us a little bit about who you're representing today?
I am representing, I could wear several hats. The George Mason University Police Department is responsible for the safety of the George Mason University in Virginia, state school, campuses in 4 different counties, 1 police department. I also am an active member of the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, and I have an understanding of the collective sense of the people who do what I do in across the country and throughout Virginia. So we are a large state school in Virginia, and I will speak for some groups that oppose the idea of students being allowed to carry their handguns onto campus.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lott?
Well, I'm at the University of Maryland right now. I've done extensive research on concealed carry, as well as multiple victim public shootings. Probably done the most extensive research in the world on that issue. And I'm an academic, been an academic most of my life. I have kids who are in college and in high school. These are not issues that I take lightly. Because I face these safety issues all the time. And I can understand, having gotten to know dozens of people who have been present at these types of attacks over time, how helpless people feel when these attacks occur. And I understand, because of that helplessness, the amount of news attention that they get. But I think the bottom line is we all want to try to take guns away from criminals. The question is, who's most likely to obey these laws? And my fear is that while it seems like the obvious thing to do is to go and just ban guns from certain areas, the risk that you face is that it's the law-abiding good citizens who are going to obey those bans and not the criminals. And what you may end up doing unintentionally is creating safe zones for the attackers who have less to worry about. The police are extremely important. My research indicates that generally the police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. But I think, as these attacks have indicated, the police almost always arrive on the scene after the crime's been committed. And the question is, what do you advise people to do when they're having to confront criminals by themselves?
Sure. Okay, so we'll get into that because you covered quite a bit. Thank you very much. Let me have Mr. Siebel introduce himself, and then we'll really get into some of these issues.
And my name is Brian Siebel. I'm with the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. I'm the author of a report that we published after the Virginia Tech shooting, because we saw this campaign to push guns into college campuses coming. And this report is all of our reasons as to why that was going to increase the risk to students every hour of every day. We think it's a very dangerous idea. It's not one that would have stopped either of the mass shootings at Virginia Tech or at Northern Illinois University, but in fact would increase the risk to students, in their dorm room, in their classrooms, and so forth. So I can certainly go into those risks. We've identified them all in here. We have a web page on this. And we are, fighting these laws that have been introduced in actually 17 states now in total. Unfortunately, to our mind, none of those bills, none have passed this year.
No, not this year, but 2 states have passed.
There's only 1 state, Utah.
Utah and
that
Colorado.
has this. No, Colorado does not have
Yes, they do.
a law.
All
on
right.
this. Anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. I see it's going to get heated, so this is great. Well, let me just ask this in general, because as we were watching that intro, I heard Mr. Ladd, I think you said it was a little biased, but we went out and we went out to the mall, and we thought we'd get tourists from all over the country, and we get people with these varying opinions, and we really had a hard time finding anyone who would say, yes, have them on campus. They were okay with having concealed weapons, but that extra step, for some reason, the campus was really a block for them. Andrew, maybe you could speak to, how would you answer that particular issue? Because these are people who say, I believe in concealed weapons, yes, in some instances, but on campus, I get a little jittery.
Well, if you believe the discourse of a lot of our opponents, it's that we're going to be right there next to the next to Visa and MasterCard, who are always trying to sign up students for credit cards, handing out guns. I mean, that's simply not the case. We believe that we should not remove a right and through mechanisms that have already been established through many, many different states. I mean, the states say, or most of the states that have these laws in place, concealed carry laws, they have very clear protocols. You have to pass certain competencies. Here in Virginia, you have to know how to shoot, you can't be a criminal, you pass certain ways. And that's, you know, I mean, that's under constant scrutiny, under constant review. However, the colleges, on top of the rules that are already in place for, churches, gas stations, and everywhere else in the state, the colleges then say, we're going to ignore this and we're going to put a giant bullseye just by saying that you're not allowed to utilize this law and utilize this licensure that you've been granted by the government.
Is it the college saying this? Can I have one of you guys respond?
Well,
is this the college saying this, or I thought also in some laws it exempts colleges specifically?
Well,
is this
Virginia,
correct?
it's up to the individual schools to decide.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
But even then, it's not clear because the state attorney general has issued, Kilgore actually, the previous state attorney general issued a ruling that said that students and faculty or people who had permits outside were allowed to carry it on. But the schools have it in their faculty or student handbooks whether or not people are able to do it. And there are some community colleges in the state that, and some private schools in the state that actually do allow teachers and or students to be able to carry concealed handguns.
Okay.
I think Chief Lynch really can address this better, but I mean, because the campus actually, he has responsibility for the safety of students when they're on campus, and if he is going to have responsibility for the safety of those students, he's got to be able to decide whether guns are allowed or not, frankly.
It's complicated, but he's correct. The Attorney General weighed in and then seems to have, I don't know, maybe changed the specifics of his opinion, but state institutions of Virginia are governed by a group of people called the Board of Visitors. The Board of Visitors sets the rules and regulations and policies for the institution. At George Mason, this is something that you're going to find clever. The Board of Visitors felt so strongly about this that even though the Virginia General Assembly, the lawmakers, didn't pass a law saying you cannot have a handgun on a college campus, which, by the way, we advocated for, that was not passed. So the Board of Visitors says we are going to pass a regulation that prohibits anybody, not a policy that applies to students and employees, faculty and staff, but to visitors also. This is a regulation, how we want our institution managed. And if you come into an academic building, a residence hall, an administration building, or if you attend a sporting or cultural event on our campus, you may not have a handgun and some other weapons that they define unless you're a police officer. And if you break that rule, my police officers can ask you to leave. So it's not a law that bans handguns, but you'll be breaking the rule and you'll be asked to leave.
And that's for all public universities?
That's for George Mason University.
For George Mason in particular.
And frankly, there's a lot of interest in how this is going to play out at Mason in the next several months.
Okay.
Yeah. The penalties, there's no penalties for visitors other than just asking them to leave, but for...
There's a penalty for refusing to leave, and that would be to be arrested for trespassing.
Right. Well, then it would be a question based upon the State Attorney General's discussion in the law. It's not even clear whether there'd be any penalty at that point. That would still have to be determined by the courts. But for students and for faculty or staff, if they were permitted to carry a concealed handgun and they were caught, then it basically varies what the penalty would be based on what's in the faculty handbook or rules for staff. Well, basically for a faculty member, if a faculty member had a permanent concealed handgun, they'd likely be fired, at least according to the rules that were there, and which basically means that they'd end their academic career, because if you got fired for a firearms violation, you're not going to get an academic job anyplace else in the country. But again, that depends on the individual school rules that are there. There are a number of universities, community colleges in Virginia.
What about Maryland? The University of Maryland, what is the law there?
Maryland is much stricter. I mean, there are 40 states like Virginia which have right to carry laws, which basically say once you've met certain objective rules, you're a certain age, 21, pass a training requirement, pay your fee, undergo a criminal background check, and you're approved, then you're allowed to go and get a permanent concealed handgun. But in Virginia,
I can speak
you're
to this
basically able to go and carry the permanent concealed handgun virtually any place in the state, except for a few limited areas. And those schools, such as what the chief is mentioning here and we've talked about, are among those. But in Maryland is more restrictive. Maryland, it's more difficult to get a permit. You're able to do so. It basically depends what part of the state that you're in. But they have the same types of rules for faculty and students there, that it's in the faculty handbook that I've looked at the University of Maryland, that you would risk getting fired even if you had a permit from Maryland to carry a concealed handgun on property.
Okay. Brian, let me ask you, and you can answer that, but also, do you have an issue with the age? Because we keep talking about the 21. These gentlemen have both brought up the issue that we're not asking 18-year-olds to have guns. We're saying people who are already 21 and they have a permit legally and can carry guns anywhere else. What would be your response to that?
Well, I mean, we have a whole appendix in this report about concealed carry licensees who've done, committed homicides, committed violent felonies with their guns, okay? So just getting a concealed carry license is not a guarantee that the person's going to be a law-abiding, upstanding citizen for the rest of their lives, okay? And I have a whole appendix here of examples of that in this report. And so there's a great deal of risk. It doesn't matter the age. I think basically any college administrator, given the choice, keeps guns out of their campus because they are responsible for safety of students, and the only way they can control the situation is to have a policy that deals with deadly weaponry on the campus. Otherwise, it's really chaos, I think, from their standpoint. About half the states, if I might finish, about half the states actually have a prohibition on carrying a concealed weapon for those who have shell issue licensees and so forth, from carrying them on campus. The rest of the states, it's up to the administrators, and there's only a few schools in the country, I think you can count them on one hand, that actually allow guns on campus. All the rest have tight policies. Even schools that have, for example, shooting teams, they still have rules for what happens to those guns on the shooting competition when they're not used in competition.
Can we get an explanation on something, though? Wait, excuse me, let me get an explanation for the audience of the shell issue state. You guys have both said that. Can you define what that is? Wait, one person. Wait, Andrew.
You can break it down into kind of 4 different categories of concealed carry laws. There's states where there are 4 different states, or ways of addressing it. There's you shall not have any concealed weapon unless you are a sworn law enforcement officer. There are states where Vermont and maybe Montana, I'm not sure if they've passed that or not, where you can purchase a weapon, put it in your holster and walk down the street without requiring anything additional. And then the distinction between concealed carry is shall issue states where if you meet the minimum requirements, you shall be issued a concealed carry license. And then the final distinction is states where you need to prove like you are a victim of domestic violence, or you have a business out of your home where you deal in massive amounts of cash, and so you have to prove a cause. So those are the 4 different distinctions.
Well, let me just say something, because in Virginia, had the shooter at Virginia Tech applied for a concealed carry license, he would have been issued one. Now, he was a prohibited purchaser, and I think that is really where we need to be talking about going here, is keeping guns out of dangerous people's hands. And actually, the lesson after Virginia Tech is that Congress passed a bill to put mental health, the people who were prohibited from buying guns because of mental illness, into the system. At the time of the Virginia Tech shooting, only 10% of the people that have been prohibited from owning guns since the '68 Gun Control Act were actually in the Brady background check system. 10% nationwide, okay? Virginia only put in the records for those people who'd been incarcerated, not those adjudicated mentally defective, which would have applied to the Virginia Tech shooter. Okay. So let me finish this. The Commonwealth would not have known, had he applied, he would have been issued a concealed carry license. So let's just be clear. This idea of arming students on campus would also arm not only the shooter at Virginia Tech, it would have armed the guy at Northern Illinois University, although Illinois and Wisconsin are one of 2 states, the only 2 states that still have no issue. But he would have gotten a concealed carry license any other state. So their vision here is give everybody a gun and start the crossfire is not to us the way to improve safety on college campuses.
Mr. Z, well, let me have you respond to that, Mr. Lott.
Yeah, I mean, it's just dishonest. I mean, first of all, the behavior of concealed handgun permit.
Wait, let's speak to the facts as opposed to.
Right.
Well, he just called me dishonest.
Right, we're not going to do that. We're going to speak to the. Can you just tell us what is incorrect, what you feel is incorrect about the information? Yeah, no, I'm just going to go through it
because in both of the previous statements, there's been issues. the previous statement that he was making about the behavior of concealed handgun permit holders, it's very easy for viewers to go and check on websites. For example, for Florida, the licensing bureau there has extremely detailed information on permit holders. You can find on their website between October 1987, when permits started being issued in Florida, and last month they had issued over 1.3 million permits to 1.3 million people. Many of those people had had their permits renewed multiple times. Of those 1.3 million people over the 20-year period of time, 164 had been revoked for any type of firearms-related violation. Almost all of those revocations were for one type of violation, and that was for people accidentally carrying a permit concealed handgun into a restricted area, like an airport or a school or something like that. You can look at Texas. Texas, the Department of Public Safety has a website. People can go to that. They have extremely detailed data on conviction rates of permit holders. And again, you find basically in any of the states, North Carolina also has a website where their licensing bureau has detailed information. And what you find is that permit holders, for any reason, lose their firearms for any firearms-related violation at hundreds or thousands of 1 percentage point. And almost all those are for relatively trivial things that in no way involved any type of danger. The point is the type of person who's going to go and cause trouble does not go and bother to go and get a concealed handgun permit. We've had lots of states that have had lots of experience. Right now, Colorado, all the state universities, except for the University of Colorado, permit holders, whether faculty or students, are allowed to carry permit concealed handguns onto school property. Utah, all the state universities are allowed to do that. Prior to the mid-90s, very few universities in this country had prohibitions in either faculty or student handbooks preventing handguns on campus. And even now, there's a large number of universities for faculty handbooks which allow you to be able to go and carry permanent concealed handguns for faculty on there. Okay. And I know of not one single case involving a multiple victim public shooting, and maybe if you can give me a few, that would be very interesting, either prior to the mid-1990s when all these universities allowed to do it, or today where we have multiple universities that allow it to do it. And prior to the end of 1995, all the right to carry states allowed people to carry permanent concealed handguns on lower school property, you know, K through 12, whether it be teachers or people picking up their kids. And I've talked to the teachers' unions, and I've tried looking at it in every way I can, and I cannot find one single example of a person with a permanent concealed handgun that had either an accidental discharge of a gun or any other types of problems. So if you can point, given we have over 5 million Americans today that have permanent concealed handguns, and if one of these cases, rather than talking about crossfire and people being harmed, I can point to a number of public school shootings that have been stopped.
We need to respond.
Wait.
But I cannot find one case where the type of things that he's talking about, where anybody's been accidentally shot by a permit holder on a university campus or lower school.
Let me respond to
all right,
I'm going to
let Mr. Lynch respond. Just give me a minute, Brian.
Because he made some false comments.
Give me a minute. I'm going to let Mr. Lynch respond.
Can we break this down instead of a discussion of how many have permits and how many states allow it? Think of the logic of the discussion, and you know where I stand. Is it a good idea for the government to disallow or ban or regulate some types of weapons? Machine guns, high capacity autos. Is it logical, is it allowable for them to ban some kinds of guns? And then, as in Virginia, is it allowable or logical for the government to ban even permit holders from having their guns in certain places like churches, bars, courthouses, other places where there's a restriction? Our position is that makes good sense. There are some weapons that you should ban. There are some places where even if you're allowed to have a weapon, you shouldn't be allowed to carry it there. And we believe that K through 12 schools, which are already on that list, belong there, and we believe that colleges belong there as well. So you could talk about the number of states, the number of this and that, but I would like people to think through what is a college campus. A college campus is dormitories, frat houses, toga parties, sporting events. Our faculty generally is way opposed to any allowance for concealed carry permit holders to carry their guns into these people's classrooms.
Do you think it's a risk for faculty to carry it?
I didn't.
Do you have any evidence that allowing a faculty member to go and carry a permanent concealed handgun when they travel on campus would produce a risk? Do you have like any evidence that there's ever been a problem with?
Yeah, there's a gun on my campus, and I believe that's a risk.
No.
Yeah,
I'm asking, do you have
Okay.
any evidence
All
of
right,
a
let's-
single
To jump in
example,
here.
any
All right,
place
Mr.
in the
Lott,
country where
let's move the
where a
discussion a
faculty
little
member-
differently here.
Well, I want to
Okay.
answer a
Well,
few
he's bringing
Yeah.
quickly
up
his things, and I'd like to bring up a different point too myself.
Let's
which
bring
is
up a different point.
Well, first of all, I have a report right here. 27 homicides by Texas concealed carry holders. Okay, so
That's not true.
Well,
Well,
it's
it's right-
also,
okay.
also, if you're going,
Okay.
I know in
stop.
No,
Let me finish this.
Let him finish
Now
this.
here's a report of a concealed carry licensee shooting professors on an Arizona campus. Okay, last year in Florida, he also said, "Oh, Florida's clean." The Florida Sun Sentinel ran a report that said 1,400 felons had been issued concealed carry licenses in the state of Florida. Okay, but I agree with Chief Lynch here. Let's move on to a different topic, because I think we could debate statistics and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm a parent of kids that are going to ultimately maybe go to public school, colleges in Virginia. And I mean, I think as a gun owner, you may feel like I'm safer if I have a gun, but your gun doesn't make me safer as a person who chooses not to carry a gun. And it certainly makes it more dangerous for my child to be in a setting where a gun is, that if it's not there. I mean, gun in the home, 5-time increase the risk of suicide. Suicide, 1,100 suicides, 24,000 attempts. If those kids got guns on campus, a lot more dead kids.
What's your alternative, Mr. Siebel? What if you don't have guns on campus? For instance, in this Virginia Tech situation, what do you propose that schools do in order to keep kids safe?
The Virginia Tech and Northern Illinois are exceedingly rare events. Okay, Virginia Tech had never had an incident prior to this, okay? So, and 93% of the crime against college students occurs off campus where guns are allowed. So campuses are actually safer than the surrounding communities, in large part because of people like Chief Lynch and the policies that these institutions embody. They've actually kept the student bodies much safer than those students would be in the society where guns are much more prevalent, like Virginia, where concealed carry is liberally allowed.
Andrew, how would you respond? Do you have a response to what he said about?
Yes, I do. I mean, you're trying to ask us on the one hand, let's look at this logically and as a thought experiment, and then you say, well, let's then turn into the statistics. I mean, you really can't have this both ways. And also, but also in the report, however,
safety.
I mean, students for concealed carry on campus, feel free to check out our website. We have a whole page of our site dedicated to putting holes in his report. I mean, you're not looking at actual people who've been convicted. We called about one in Fort Lauderdale that you used, and we called their media director, and they said, well, no, there were no charges, no conviction in that case. It was, after a while, they ruled that it was in policy. I mean, so to what extent, where is your data, I mean, coming from just, they were arrested or this or that? On the other hand, if you look at the actual, I mean, the fact that I first off personally resent the implication that college students are a bunch of drunk drug abusers. I mean, it's amazing that I and my peers here were able to stumble out of our cocaine-induced stupors and make it to the studio today underneath your line of reasoning.
Are you saying no one is on campus?
I'm not saying no one is, but I'm saying
Okay.
if you look at the people who actually choose to carry concealed licenses and go through that entire process.
But being even a binge drinker is not a disqualifying factor in getting a concealed carry license.
Nor is it one from
Virginia.
getting one in an apartment and you go into a privately held frat house owned by your fraternity. I mean, and yet you don't see these massive shootouts occurring where concealed carry and drinking are both simultaneously legal.
I'm not
you
saying
don't
there's
see massive shootouts occurring hardly anywhere. Okay.
But they occur time after time where permanent concealed handguns are banned. If you look at all the multiple
And
big
where they're not banned.
No,
Right.
that's not
And-
true.
Right.
Look, name me one place
Kirkwood,
involving more
Missouri.
than 3 people killed where it's occurred where you have allowed permanent concealed handguns.
Look, there was an
every
example.
case,
Not-
every
All right. No.
Every
Actually, we
multi-
have a phone call, and I
Okay.
want to take that call.
Well, I'd
So
like to
let's just
respond
take
to
a
the
moment.
logic, if I
No,
could,
let's just
just
take a moment, please.
Let's go ahead and take a phone call. We have Shauna from Alexandria.
Yes. Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay, it seems as though society always has a huge overreaction to what is a unique event, such as the Virginia Tech shooting. And my question is, where do we draw the line? Yes, we all have the right to, the constitutional right to bear arms. However, I don't understand how this situation is any different from the Columbine shooting, where you had 18-year-olds who were about to go away to college who have the same right to bear arms. Why, if we're going to allow it at college campuses, why wouldn't we also allow it at high schools? And you know what? Some junior high schools are also dangerous. Where do you draw the line with this type of thinking, rationale?
Well, I think
good question. You have a response?
One place to draw it is when somebody's an adult or not. We can look to see what the different states have.
Should there be places where it is not allowed to have a concealed?
The point is, look at all the shootings over the last couple decades or whatever. Every one involving more than 3 people killed in a multiple victim public shooting where the point of the attack was to go and harm people has occurred where guns are banned.
No. Kirkwood, Missouri in May. Okay, Kirkwood, Missouri City Council. First victim was an armed police officer.
That's exactly right.
He took the then took the gun from the police officer, continued to carry on his attack, killed another armed police officer, and then started shooting city council members. So this idea that suddenly you're going to arm students and suddenly save the day makes no sense.
No, but the point is, that's exactly proves the point. I'm saying permanent concealed handgun holders were not allowed in that situation.
The police officers had guns.
No, but the point is, a uniform...
They didn't stop it.
Yeah, but
that's kind of our point.
A uniformed person is the exact person that a killer takes out first. Israel tried to do this. If you look at Israel in their terrorist attacks over time, during the 60s and early 70s, they tried flooding the area with uniformed police and with military. And they found it didn't work because the terrorists would do one of two things. They'd either wait for the uniformed people to leave the area or those would be the first person killed. In 1972, Israel finally gave up knowing that they couldn't have enough police to go and protect everybody. And they started allowing people to carry concealed handguns. Right now, about 15% of the adult Israeli Jewish population is allowed to carry permanent concealed handguns. And at that point, what happened was terrorists stopped. Before that, all the terrorist attacks involved machine guns, just about. After that point in time, virtually all of them involved bombings. The reason why it changed at that point was because when you had, let's say, a public place with 50 people, or 100 people, whether it be a synagogue or a mall or what have you, the terrorists didn't know who was able to stop them to begin with. And
these are suicide
shooters. I want to get back to our issue, though. We're talking about on college campus.
And these are
no. Let me ask this question. Can we say that there is a place? Do you two think that there is a place where guns should not be allowed?
I think it has the opposite effect. What happens is
that a yes or no?
I think they should be allowed in places. And here's the...
So there's no place that you don't think guns should not be allowed?
What about airplanes?
I think airplanes we can talk about as being different. But I think...
Courthouses.
Andrew.
But I just want to make one point here, and that is, let's say you were really being threatened. Somebody was stalking you or your family. Mm-hmm. Would you feel safer putting a sign in front of your house that said your home was a gun-free zone?
We're not talking about guns.
Would that make it more or less likely, do you think, that that this stalker would attack you in your home? Would that dissuade him from doing it?
I think but I want to stay focused on the campus. Wait, can I have Andrew respond?
You're referring to we're talking about college campuses. However, I mean, you do have private organizations do have a right in many of these, I think all of these, to my knowledge at least, right to carry states to post this. And the McDonald's massacre, I believe, is where somebody had a gun locked in her car. I mean, so I mean, they do. I mean, these provisions are in place. I believe it's a good idea. I mean, however, if my house, I want to say no one can have a firearm, then I mean that's my right as a property owner. However, I mean, what we're saying is if it's a good idea or not to prohibit people who are verified as being law-abiding citizens. And I just want to go back a couple minutes to where you said that Cho could have had a concealed carry license. Well, why didn't he get one is the question. I mean, why didn't he want to be a law-abiding murderer then before he went on campus?
Because the campus policy at Virginia Tech was no guns. So wouldn't have helped him to get a concealed carry license and carry it on to campus. I mean, under this plan, essentially, Chief Lynch couldn't disarm a potential next attacker until he started shooting. I think that's what we'd be ending up with, where the actual shooter could then get a license, come onto campus, and you wouldn't be able to stop the event. We've actually had lockdowns where people have been, apprehended with guns.
All right, Al has been waiting patiently to ask you guys a question. Al Bender, you're from College Democrats, correct? Go ahead and ask your question.
My question is that there's been all this discussion about whether or not it makes it safer to have guns on campus. But as an issue of practicality, and either the lawyer on my left or the police officer on my right can correct me if I'm wrong, you're not frequently allowed to fire a gun or to discharge a firearm anywhere, and they're only allowed to do it when in an instance of imminent physical danger, being specifically when you're in the case of a handgun. So even if somebody were to, say, pull a knife on you, there's a good chance that if you were to shoot them, you probably would get off on self-defense. So given this, what is actually the likelihood, given the infrequent occurrence of guns on campus, that this would actually have any kind of use other than simply affecting students, making them feel less safe in classrooms, and harming the educational environment, which is what schools are expected to protect?
Very good question.
Well,
yes. No. Let these guys answer that.
But Roanoke, Roanoke Times, sorry.
Let these guys answer. He's directing it
well,
here.
However, we've had over 60 semesters, cumulatively, of schools trying this, where they've allowed things. And
Which schools?
A lot of them in Utah have, and I don't know all of them outside of Utah at this time.
Colorado universities, except for the University of Colorado. But you have universities across country that allow faculty to do it. You have Dartmouth College. You can go through the faculty handbooks. Many places, unless you've looked through the faculty handbooks, as I have in many places, you'd be surprised the schools that allow faculty to go and carry concealed handguns.
So answer his question, though, about the issue of how does it really help if you're not supposed to fire a gun anyway?
My answer to that is, that's up to the individual citizen to decide. Do you want to spend hundreds of dollars and many hours to go through this training process? You don't want to wait the weeks and weeks and to be able to go through training, to be able to get your license, to apply for it, get accepted, go get your picture taken. But that really is up to the individual if it's worth that to him. It's not the role of the university or to say that, the state says this, you said this, but, we're going to act, and we're going to say no to you. Most people, do not have a routinely on a daily basis carry around a concealed weapon, but that's because it's difficult to get, and a lot of people aren't eligible for them. But it's up to the individual to make the decision if they want to or not.
Okay, Mr. Lynch.
I think we need to look at it more broadly. If the college students on my institution were allowed to carry weapons with permits, what's possible in that case? It's possible that when Cho comes through the door or the bad guy comes through the door, an armed student can eliminate that threat and save the day. That's possible. Other things that are possible are availability to use it when you get depressed and think about suicide. The possibility that it could accidentally discharge while you're handling it or cleaning it. The possibility that it'll be stolen from your book bag or stolen from your car, or that you'll lose it, lay it down somewhere. Where'd I leave that thing? All of these things happen, and it is possible that the student with the handgun can save the day on the next mass shooter, and it is also possible that many, many, many other things could happen in a college environment. And this is a college we're talking about. Remember what goes on at colleges. And for that reason, we believe that it doesn't make colleges safer. It exposes the community to greater and greater risks because there are more handguns around. And handguns are dangerous.
Yeah, as a parent, I make a choice when I decide whether my child can have a sleepover at someone else's house, whether that person has a gun, and even whether that person stores those guns responsibly. These are choices that we make as parents to protect our children. Now, I do not want to send my child into a campus environment where students are carrying guns with no accountability. I think there's an issue of accountability. Chief Lynch, when he carries a gun on campus, is accountable. He's trained and he's accountable. Anybody who has a concealed carry license gets 1 4-hour training in the state of Virginia for their life, and they can continually renew that. It's like getting a driver's license, basically. We know how many reckless drivers there are on the road. And that's it. And you don't really have to do any further training. And there's studies that show that police officers hit their targets only about 20% of the time. Okay, so, but even I would trust him. I would trust him because he has been trained, but mostly it's because he is accountable. So he is there to protect the safety of my child. Whereas a student who has a concealed carry license, they have no accountability to anybody but their own personal self. And I was on a Nevada talk show. Okay. A caller called in and said his son was killed by someone who was shooting at someone else. Okay, so this idea of a crossfire does, in fact, kill people.
Okay, let me ask you, Mr. Lott.
Give an example where a permanent concealed handgun holder has accidentally killed somebody else in stopping one of these attacks. I'd love to hear it beyond just an anonymous case.
Okay, let me ask you this, Mr. Lott. Why do you want concealed guns on campus? Is it for this scenario of stopping a show, or is it just, what is your reasoning for wanting guns on campus?
All right. I've looked at all the multiple victim public shootings in the United States from 1977 through now. Bill Landis at the University of Chicago, and I've looked at these. And what you find in all these cases involving more than a few people killed, there's one common factor, and that is they occur in places where permanent concealed handguns are banned. And you look at the mall shootings that occurred last year in Omaha or Salt Lake City or Kansas City. You have, in Omaha, there's like 8 major malls in the city. 2 of them ban people to carry permanent concealed handguns. In Salt Lake City, there's a number of large malls there. There's 2 that ban people being able to carry concealed handguns. In Kansas City, you had a number of malls again, only a couple banned it. Yet those are the places that they occur. We've mentioned the Columbine attack. Do you know that Dylan Klebold was following closely the permanent concealed handgun law there in the state, was lobbying against it, and decided to engage in his attack the very day the state legislature in Colorado was voting on final passage of the concealed handgun law. And the big thing that he had written to the legislators about was he was opposed to the fact that the state law at that time would have allowed people to carry permanent concealed handguns on school property. You find time after time these killers are aware of where you're allowed to carry permanent concealed handguns. They realize that they can make it more difficult for them to go and engage in these attacks. If it was random, then some of these attacks involving more than a few people killed would be taking places in places where you're allowed to carry permanent concealed handguns.
I gave an example from
I just want to
month.
give one example of some of the dishonesty here, because
there's no dishonesty.
It is.
On this
I'll just
side
give you
here.
one. Go to the Department of Public Safety website in Texas. He said there are 27 cases where people have killed others. Virtually all those were arrests. And what happens is that if you are attacked by a criminal and you use your permanent concealed handgun to protect yourself, you're going to be arrested because the police don't know what's going to happen. You'll be released later, but it's going to go down as arrest. Those are cases where people saved their lives, and yet he's including those because the arrest was used there as a bad case.
Is that accurate?
No, his report is
You
actually...
can go to the Department of Public Safety website.
Okay.
His report is done by people who are touting, pushing, concealed carry. So
it's the police in Texas. And just one other example, he opposed off-duty police officers carrying guns. He talks about now, there was a bill that was passed in Congress a couple years ago, and his organization for 10 years was lobbying against letting off-duty police officers, when they were traveling, to carry permanent concealed handguns. He's saying now he thinks somebody like the chief should be able to go and carry guns, but he doesn't trust the chief to go and carry a gun as soon as he's off duty, even though he claims that while he's on duty.
Can you respond to that?
I think we're way off track here. I think this is way off subject.
These are points you brought up.
No, the point I made is quite clear. That I gave you an example from last month where a mass shooting, again, and 2 armed police officers were unable to stop it. Okay, the idea, I mean, the shooter at Virginia Tech committed suicide. The shooter at Northern Illinois committed suicide. The idea that they would be deterred when they go in knowing they're going to kill themselves at the end of this, that they would be deterred by someone shooting back at them, I think is just crazy, frankly.
Okay.
Well,
we're going to go to a little break in a second, but I want Andrew to answer the same question I asked Mr. Lott, which was, why do you think having guns on campus is an important thing?
Well, I believe the first caller made a good point that we have large-scale events and then there are reactions to those, but every single day that there are people being assaulted, mugged everywhere. I mean, you can't go around my campus without seeing an 8.5 by 11 bright orange flyer with the latest violent crime that occurred. I mean, most concealed carriers, most crimes that are prevented using a concealed firearm, there are no shots fired. I mean, we aren't a bunch of cowboys riding around, our campuses on horses, shooting it out with the bad guys. Once a weapon's fired, they're, oh crap, I have a knife, he has a gun, I'm gonna make myself very scarce right now. I mean, that's the everyday scenario that really does play out. And if you really look at the data, it's you have these doomsday scenarios that, yes, I mean, that are very important to consider. In addition, however, you need to keep in mind the everyday realities of being a student and the fact that, I'm in a university that has an accredited police department that's very, very good. However, I mean, even with that department and our, under 4-minute response time to any point on campus, we still have these bright orange flyers for all of our, violent crime and everything else. So, I mean, you just have to understand that even in everyday life that there is a certain inherent risk that, we can choose. I mean, there's a risk to both courses of action. However, I think we should leave it up to the state and to the individual to decide which course of action is better.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to a quick break, and then we'll come back and finish this discussion. And you guys can be a part of it if you call 703-524-2348. We'll be right back.
This is the town where I grew up. I've traveled the world chasing success, dined with heads of state, but I always come home. Every chance I get, I share my experiences with children in the neighborhood, because kids have to see a future in order to have one. I work with community leaders, teachers, and parents who are also trying to make a difference. I involve the community in my journey. That's how we make our communities better. I often wonder why more people don't do the same. They tell me that they're waiting to make history first, to be rich, famous. They're chasing success, and if they catch it, then they'll give back. I always come home because we don't have to wait. We can't wait. We all have to give along the way.
Hi, and welcome back to this episode of VoiceBox. Today we are talking about carrying concealed weapons on college campuses. And you can join this conversation by calling us at 703-524-2348. So we're going to jump in with a question from an audience member, Zach Morgan. Go ahead and ask your question.
My question's for the chief. He was talking about earlier that if we were to allow guns on campus, that what would happen was people might lose them, they might be careless with them. But don't those arguments also apply to off-campus apartments where students happen to live, houses in general where people are? Because people are sometimes careless. People sometimes might misplace their gun. Doesn't your argument eventually boil down to not just logically against concealed weapons in general, but that people shouldn't have guns because they're not responsible enough to hold them?
I'm talking about, it's a great question. That's a fine question. What I'm talking about is my community and then the people that I serve. My community is 17 to 24-year-old people, the resident population, away from home for the first time, making good decisions and making bad decisions about the things they want to do, and playing beer pong and doing belly button shooters and going to toga parties, and all that stuff happens in my community. We could add the ability to carry handguns to that group of people's arsenal of exciting things in college. And I don't think it would make the colleges safer.
Would you oppose faculty members being able to do it?
I don't know. I haven't thought that through. And the reason I haven't thought it through is because, generally speaking, our faculty at George Mason University is dead opposed to having handguns in their classrooms. And so I haven't really had to
Well, I know
to
the
think that
economics
through.
department and the law school both would like to do it.
I am sure that you could find a couple of people who would. And
Well, I'm saying
you know,
most of the members of both of those two departments, at least, places would do so.
I'm not denying that. As again, I'll say, I don't believe that those people, more and more people, carrying handguns into our classrooms
I'm
and
just
other
asking as a
places on campus
theoretical issue.
make it safer.
I'm just asking you, without doing a poll of people, do the concerns that you have that, say, cause you to oppose letting 21-year-olds being able to, or 24-year-olds carrying a permanent concealed handgun, would that apply to a 45-year-old faculty member or a 50-year-old faculty member?
I would still be opposed. I would still be opposed.
And why?
Because there would be a handgun in the classroom. Maybe it's going to be on the person. Maybe it's going to be in his briefcase. Maybe it's going to be in his top desk drawer. I'm really not sure that that would make the classroom safer. I believe that the potential for other things to happen besides that faculty member saving the day is greater than the possibility that that faculty member will save the day. And that's an intuitive thing that is my belief. I can't point to a place in Colorado where that happened. I'm just saying I don't believe it'll make the classroom environment at my college safer.
Okay,
You know,
let me have
Andrew
Allison.
raised a point. I want to actually, you said that, I think you said, that it would be fine for someone to say, no guns in my house. Is that a fair statement? A person can make a choice, no guns in my house. Even if you're a concealed carry licensee, you might not let people come over to your house with guns, right?
It would be a bad decision, but it's a bad decision I can make, just like the chief said.
But it's your property and you have responsibility in that situation.
That's the way that the laws have been construed this far, yes.
Okay, well, I guess I would say that the campus is like Chief Lynch's house, okay? That the college administration actually has some responsibility, just like you do over the people that come to your house, for the safety of the people that come onto your property. And so if they're going to have that responsibility, which they do, because frankly, Virginia Tech got sued in the situation. They paid out a lot of money to the victims there. They had responsibility for the safety of those students, okay? If they're going to have that responsibility, they have to have the means to protect those students and make the choice whether guns can be allowed or guns should be prohibited. And I guarantee you they've almost all made the choice to keep guns out for logical reasons, because the first way we secure areas, whether it be airports or schools or you name it, is to keep the guns out.
Okay, all right. We have 7 minutes left. I want to make sure if the audience member has a question, they can get it in. So Allison Cole in the back, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe for part of the discussion we could talk about how you think both your sides help contribute to trying to end the culture of violence that we have in the United States. And also a question about some of Mr. Lott's research. Is there any way for you to prove that the gun-free zone was a motivation for the attacker instead of the fact that it's a college campus and that person had specific targets there, or the fact that it was a public place, or the fact that they're suicidal and insane? Is there enough of a sample size from your studies to prove that the fact that it was a gun-free zone was part of the motivation for the location?
Right.
Great question.
No, I think that's an excellent question. Bill Landis at University of Chicago and I looked at all the multiple victim public shootings from 1977 through 1999 in the United States. And you follow each jurisdiction over time to see what's the rate of multiple victim public shootings before and after a whole change of different laws. We looked at things like law enforcement efforts, arrest rates, conviction rates, prison sentence lengths, the death penalty, lots of demographics, income, poverty, lots of different types of measures there. When we looked at 13 different types of gun control laws too. And what we found was that the only thing, law enforcement didn't affect the rate at which these crimes occurred, even though they affect crime generally. And there was a simple reason, we believe, for that's the case, and that is about 75% of the time that these people commit these crimes, they die at the scene. And even when we talk to the other 25% that live, virtually all of them thought that they were going to die at the scene. What happens time after time is these people in their warped minds think that their goal is to try to create as much carnage as they can. Time after time you see discussions about can I kill or harm more people than was harmed in the previous attacks, because they believe how much media attention that they can get is related to how much damage and harm that they can do. Out of all the different types of gun control laws that we looked at, the only thing that affected the rate at which these horrible attacks occurred was the passage of these right-to-carry laws. There was about 60% drop in the rate at which multiple victim public shootings occurred after these attacks occurred, after these laws were passed. It was quite statistically significant. And to the extent to which the attacks still occurred, as I was mentioning earlier, anything more than a few people killed, they all, every single one, occurred in places where concealed handguns were banned. And, you know, the odds of something like that happening randomly is just incredibly small.
Okay.
And we
I'd
have,
like to answer the other part of her question.
All right, because we're down to 4 minutes,
well, I'd
so
like
I want
to
to
say,
go
you
ahead.
know, how do we deal with the violence problem? I mean, to us, the issue is really how do we keep guns out of dangerous people's hands? And things like, for example, in Virginia, why do we still have a gun show loophole? Why do we still allow people who have a felony record to go into any gun show in Virginia and buy guns off the table from a private seller without a Brady background check? That doesn't make any sense. We don't let people get on airplanes unless everybody's gone through the metal detector. We don't let, you know, some people go through, which is what you'd have to do if you bought a gun from a dealer, and other people go without going through the metal detector, which is kind of like the gun show loophole. So why do we have that situation? That's where we need to be focusing our attention, is keeping guns out of dangerous people's hands. Again, Cho should not have got, the shooter at Virginia Tech should never have gotten a gun in the first place. And that's the lesson Congress drew from this. And even the NRA backed putting more records in the system. I mean, the NRA has actually even said that background checks are not gun control.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a point of agreement, at least. Let me.
Well, I think we all want to take guns away from criminals.
Okay.
The question is, who's most likely to obey these rules? And sometimes you unintentionally have a bad effect when you ban guns from certain areas. If I'm a faculty member, as I've been at lots of universities in the country, and I violate a gun-free zone, my career as an academic is going to be over. Or if a student goes and violates it, they're not going to be able to finish their academic career anyplace. But the notion that somehow the threat of being expelled would stop somebody like Cho from going and killing people when he's already going to face 32 death penalties or 32 life sentences is ludicrous.
I think you
and what happens is, if you ban it, if you make it...
Mr. Lynch, Mr. Lynch, if you have a kind of a wrapping up you could do.
I appreciate the question in this context.
Okay.
You know, what can this side and this side contribute? I believe that a logical, reasoned, long-term discussion about this issue, less emotional and even less empirical, less, you know, 20% and 3% and how many thousands. I think if you reason it through, that's what I would encourage people to do. Think about the possibilities and the probabilities of what you're deciding, and carefully reason that through before you knee-jerk something, and you know, talk about unintended consequences. Are we going to pass a law that's going to have a consequence that makes the colleges more dangerous instead of more safe? And that's what I think this type of discussion contributes.
All right, well, thank you. We actually have to wrap this up because we're like down to a minute left. It's been a great discussion, but I think for you at home, you have to look at the facts yourself. It looks like both sides have numbers and statistics that you can check out, but this legislation is coming to you at some point. I don't think it's going away. So thank you for being a part of this conversation. Our next Voice Box will be on June 19th, and we'll be tackling the issue of immigration. So we hope to see you then. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.